Welcome to the second annual Sovereign Radio. I'm your host, Chango Unchained, and I'm here with Dino from Fluent, and we're going to talk about blended VMs. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Excited to chat. And thank you for you guys hosting this amazing event. Probably my favorite event. It was definitely my favorite event last year, and I'm no doubt that it'll probably be my favorite event this year.
I agree. I can't take credit for organizing this event at all. This is a Yaz and Natalie production from Celestia Labs. And I'm just an interviewer here. So we're here at Modular Summit, and you gave a talk about Fluent and the problem space of having multiple VMs and not really having some kind of coordinated platform for people to pick and choose what they want to use. So right now, there's been a Cambrian explosion of different VMs. There's MoveVM, SVM, the EVM, obviously. In Cosmos, we have no VM. So there's just too many to choose from. But Fluent, interestingly enough, is doing something called blended VMs, and we want to hear about that.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. So yes, as you said, there's a Cambrian explosion of L2s, chains, VMs. And right now, I think that our view in the problem space is right now you really have to make some pretty stark trade-offs, just very coarse grain. Let's just say the EVM type world, and even to some degree the SVM has some go-to-market benefits. People shit on the EVM and for valid technical reasons, but from a go-to-market perspective, if you're a dev bringing something into the market, there are reasons to use it. You can actually iterate more quickly, the tooling, the knowledge base. You could type something into ChatGPT and get an answer if you have a problem. So I'll call those go-to-market reasons. But then at the same time, there's a lot of, as you said, kind of next-gen VMs popping up, whether it be it MoveVM, be it a number of other VMs that have kind of technical benefits, whether it's formal verification or parallelization, whatever. And so right now, people have to. I mean, previously people had to make a very stark decision whether it's okay, do I care more about the ecosystem go-to-market benefits or the technical benefits? And the reality is. It's kind of a hard choice because the technical benefits have been very sexy over the past couple of years, or the past year mostly. But you're kind of placing a pretty extreme bet on an ecosystem to be able to bootstrap something new. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing is we said, okay, well, can we actually give people the best of both these worlds? And what we, as we say it, blend, create a new type of blended VM that actually lets people come. And depending on which VM support, the person supports, obviously Fluent is one. Ideally, the end state is Fluent is kind of the first blended execution network, but just one blended execution network. We focus on EVM, WASM, and SVM apps. So the idea is a dev can come, that you can copy paste EVM stuff in there, copy paste SVM stuff in there, build WASM stuff. So what that means is, any of the languages that compile. I mean, obviously
CosmWasm? That includes CosmWasm?
So not CosmWasm per se, but any of the, at least not right now, but the any kind of languages that compile down to WebAssembly. Right now we're just starting by supporting Rust, but we'll add TypeScript and many others over time. But I guess just more broadly, we will end up supporting different VM environments, and I think we can get into this later if you want, but the design to which we built the system makes it pretty trivially extensible to other environments. So we could add Fuel, we could have Move, we could have whatever else. So we could add CosmWasm. Yeah. It's a little bit more tricky because that's obviously Go, and so we would need to do it in TinyGo and whatever. There's some implementation stuff there, but yeah, it's a pretty cool design. It gives developers just a ton of expressivity on what they want to build, right? I mentioned the simple base case of easily porting over things from SVM, EVM, and building WASM stuff. But I think the more interesting thing to do is build what we're calling blended apps, which you can think of it as imagine somebody building just a Solidity app that leverages some Rust libraries, very simple, but you can actually get exposure to just many more tools and building blocks than you otherwise would in an EVM only chain or an SVM only chain.
As a developer, because at least in the Cosmos space, the problem with us is that we're not compatible whatsoever with the EVM. And in order to do so, well, there have been Cosmos SDK app chains that have been built that have EVM in it. So we have Geth as a module. And so that's been the way that we've been kind of speaking the EVM language in Cosmos. But then at the same time, the UX is such that it's almost like two separate chains in one. And in order to transact in that one app chain, there's almost like some kind of bridging involved. And so if you have a blended VM in one execution environment effectively, how would that work? Would it be like many different little, VMs, like little EVMs and like CosmWasm VM and Move VM, and then bridging between each other in that sense? Or what would the UX actually be like for an average user?
It's a good question. So like what we've seen over the past year is a bunch of different like attempts at solving this problem, and like for the in a lot of them they play out exactly how you described, where like you would actually take multiple different VMs and run them. Sometimes it's by like a third party team that comes in and say, hey, how do we get like EVM on Solana or EVM on this or even on that, but like fundamentally they're just like a VM kind of like running or force fit onto another VM. And that ends up like, from our experience, being like pretty clunky. And so we didn't want to take that approach. You also see other approaches that just have multiple different VMs. I'll say like more on like the same plane, and like the interop experience is like better, but we still don't find it to be like that efficient or scalable. And so what we did is we basically just solve it like using like precompiles. And that ends up being like much more efficient, and actually makes it not only more efficient to like ZK proof the current VMs that we support, but or VM targets that we support, since again we're not actually running those VMs, we're simulating them, but also makes it pretty trivially extensible to new VM targets. So if we wanted to add like one of the first like external like VMs that we're going to add is Fuel VM. We've been talking to them. And we could add Move, and we could add some other, and there are other like implementation like challenges to doing so, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to support all of those VMs on like our L2 instance. But like as far as kind of like the VM and like framework called Fluent base that we're building kind of like as a on the side, we of course we want to integrate like more VM targets so other people can spin up chains, with different types of combinations or different like blends of VMs.
Mm-hmm. Help me understand your architecture a little bit better. It sounds like you're a rollup, and you're a rollup that runs these precompiles of different VMs. But as a dApp developer who's using this,
Yep.
Let's say you want to pick up the Fuel VM or something, but use your precompile, where are they actually executing their dApp?
So
like, where is the dApp actually being hosted? The smart contract.
Yeah, so I want to distinguish actually between, let's just say Fluent L2 and Fluent base. So Fluent L2 is a rollup on Ethereum, that's correct. Mm-hmm. And there, for the foreseeable future, we'll only be supporting EVM, WASM, SVM apps. So in that specific, you mentioned Fuel, but in that specific scenario, if you have some type of like app that you otherwise could have deployed on like Solana or something, or on another EVM chain, you can pretty much just copy and paste it, change the RPC, like everything works. It's 100% compatible with like each of those environments. And then the WASM environment is more of like kind of our own like thing where like, we have, so currently we have like a Rust SDK, but like we're going to be building, or the community could build like additional SDKs for that. Now that's Fluent, let's just say for Fluent L2. And then for Fluent base, we can add kind of like support for more and more VM targets. And I think that
what is Fluent base, first of all? Is it an app chain, or is it a rollup?
Yeah, sorry, that's a like a rollup framework. So you can think of it, you can like ultimately think of like Fluent L2 more akin to like an OP mainnet, and then like Fluent base is more of like an OP stack kind of thing. So it's like the L2 and then a framework for people to build, kind of like customize their own L2s with like a similar core.
Okay, so in Celestia speak, kind of like Rollkit?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Gotcha. All right, so how does that work for developers?
Well, developers building like a chain with Fluent base, or developers who are deploying on like a chain, like on a blended like rollup, basically. I could probably talk to the latter.
What part of this entire thing do you see actual traction in? So like, who's your target?
Yeah, good question. So like I mentioned those two things. We're completely focused right now on the first one, which is just like RL2, getting that off the ground is obviously just like a difficult enough like, challenge, and building momentum around that. And so our like target audience would just be like devs who really want to just like push the boundaries of, I guess, what was previously possible with like the EVM or any of these individual like these individual execution environments, right? So like we're seeing some excitement around, people taking like forking stuff in Solidity, but like differentiating it. Like it could be a DEX, it could be whatever, like differentiating it in Rust. Like for example, I mean, that happens to be the first thing that we're like supporting. But you can kind of envision a lot of different like combinations like that where, you can basically like add either more efficient components like to your app that like wouldn't have really been feasible in Solidity, or just make things kind of like more performant using like right now Rust, but ultimately like C++ libraries or things like that.
Gotcha. Right. So speaking of the blended VM, how do you see people actually using it in practice?
So one thing to note, like we actually just released our like DevNet maybe like a few weeks ago, and so it's early days for us, but we are seeing like a lot of interesting, like we're kind of seeing two different things. Like for the most part, it's been very easy for people to port over just like Solidity apps. So people who are just like excited about the future of like kind of blended VMs and like what's possible there. So that's kind of like more on like go to market side. But like at the same time, we are kind of like exploring the design space with devs trying to build kind of like new things. So we're seeing some interest from like the gaming community. You have a lot of those folks who like are, they appreciate the properties of like Rust, and like they also understand like the value in basically like design. They're world builders, right? Like they understand the value of just kind of using kind of like the best component, the best tool for like each part to like really make sure you design the best experience. So like the idea of like using like Solidity like where it makes sense and using Rust where it makes sense really resonates well. And so I think we're pretty well suited for some stuff in like kind of GameFi. We're also seeing a lot of like those types of builders start to become more interested in like SocialFi consumer stuff. I think that's just like based on the state of things today, like where a lot of like excitement is going. So yeah, we'd be happy to like, foster those types of environments. But at the end of the day, obviously permissionless system, and we
Sure.
build whatever.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Do you see this scaling to billions of users in the future, or is this more of a proof of concept right now?
The L2 scaling to billions of users, or what do you mean?
Well, for example, if someone were to build a GameFi application or a SocialFi application that has potentially hundreds of millions of users, early days, then I would imagine it needs to scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this architecture is really novel, let's say. So I'm wondering how that's going to scale for any one of these applications that you gave an example of.
We'll probably at some point, like run into similar challenges as any other roll up or chain, right? This is definitely not trying to. Oh yeah, there's one thing I want to make clear. Like this is definitely not us saying like, hey, we have this blended VM. You could put everything in it. So like, let's just sorry everybody, go home. Like this should be like the one place where all the apps go. Definitely not like what our main point is. Somewhat technically, like obviously there are limitations. Like we will. I think this will be a very like scalable design because we can actually like parallelize the blended VM and then actually get some of those parallelization benefits for kind of the supporting VM targets that we offer. But like just completely putting that aside, like. No, we don't think that this will scale to the billions of people in the world, and our idea is not like, hey, this should just be one big fat roll up. Instead, we do see if there's going to be a million single execution networks as we call them, like EVM only or whatever, we would love to see a million like blended execution networks, and we just think it's like it broadens the design space for any of these individual like sandboxes. So we just think it's like a better way to build execution environments.
Okay, interesting. Would you almost call this blended execution environment a hybrid of sorts?
Yeah, I guess you can call it that.
Kind of,
Yeah, you could.
I'm just thinking about dog breeds right now. Just like putting all of them together.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, I don't think we don't want to put necessarily like all of them together. There's definitely like some like technical like challenges if you were just gonna like keep adding more and more and more, right? Like that would get really hard. Like, so we're focusing on like these three like strategically. I think like obviously EVM and SVM. Like SVM's interesting technically and ecosystem wise. EVM's interesting ecosystem wise. And then like we think WebAssembly is awesome, and we think that enabling people to use like millions of more like libraries and like dozens of more programming languages in tandem with like what's already established in Web3 just ends up being like a net better experience for developers, especially if you can actually crack the code and make that like a seamless developer environment.
Right.
But we don't necessarily even see like any individual blended execution network just like supporting everything. Like ideally, like, you know, let's just say we support those three, maybe add a couple of more if they're interesting in our L2. But it, like, as we actually get this framework off the ground as kind of like an act two, I guess, and people start building other blended execution networks, you know, maybe they make different trade-offs, right? Like maybe somebody wants to just focus on like move and SVM, great, and make it like super compatible with like move things, like great, do it. So I really think, and that's why I'm saying, like, I think that it's just a better way to design execution environments, no matter what types of trade-offs you want to make.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, if you've been nerd sniped by Dino here, please follow more about Fluent in the future and tune into his talk at Modular Summit, which will be in the same series, I believe. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. See you.
Thanks.